Pyotr Tchaikovsky was riding high from the success of his ballet, The Sleeping Beauty, when he was commissioned to compose a double bill program for imperial theaters, an opera and a ballet. This included Tchaikovsky's last opera, Iolanta, and The Nutcracker, choreographed by Marius Petipa, who collaborated with Tchaikovsky on The Sleeping Beauty and was the ballet master at the Imperial Ballet. The storyline was sourced from Alexander Dumas' The Tale of the Nutcracker, which in turn was adapted from E.T.A. Hoffmann's story, The Nutcracker and the Mouse King. Petipa streamlined the plotline of the ballet to center on a little girl who receives a magical nutcracker as a Christmas gift and enters an otherworldly realm of treats, toys, and ethereal beauty. Lev Ivanov stepped in to assist Marius Petipa as his health began to fail, and though it's believed Ivanov choreographed a large percentage of the 1892 Nutcracker premiere performance, Petipa was still credited as the choreographer on all the St. Petersburg promotional posters, which, at least as far as the critics were concerned, wasn't such a high honor. When the Nutcracker debuted at the Imperial Mariinsky Theater in St. Petersburg on December 18, 1892, the critics generally gave it high marks for Tchaikovsky's score, but ruthlessly panned the ballet's choreography and storyline. Unfortunately for its creators, audiences largely agreed with the critics on this one. Among the numerous complaints about the Nutcracker was that it was filled with children. The plot was, of course, geared to appeal to children, and there were children everywhere. If ballet aficionados wanted to deal with children, they could have stayed home with their own. As one critic said, in the first scene, the entire stage is filled with children who run about, blow their whistles, hop and jump, are naughty, and interfere with the oldsters dancing. In large amounts, this is unbearable. Another noted, in general, the new ballet is produced primarily with children, for children, and everything that can have value in their eyes as regards external brilliance. On that note, another critic stated, first of all, the Nutcracker cannot in any event be called a ballet. It does not satisfy even one of the demands made of a ballet. And yet another stated, let us add that having elicited the general disapproval of Ballet Tomanis, the Nutcracker failed with the public as well, who found it boring with good reason. God grant that similar failed experiments do not happen often. Several critics noted that the boring nature of it was due to the fact that it didn't really have a story, but, to quote, rather a series of unconnected scenes recalling the latest pantomime which the boulevard theaters flaunt. What the Nutcracker did have, however, was great music. As one contemporary critic noted, in sum, it's a pity that so much good music is expended on such nonsense, so unworthy of attention. But the music was a good core that later choreographers could work with, and work with they did, with each iteration trying to address the criticisms of the previous performances, all set to Tchaikovsky's amazing score. The Nutcracker was first performed outside of Russia in England in 1934. It was brought to the United States in 1944 by the San Francisco Ballet, though an abridged version had been presented in New York City in 1940. But it wasn't until 1954 in New York City, when the version of the ballet with George Balanchine's staging began appearing, that the Nutcracker's popularity began to really rise, thanks to various improvements over the years from the late 1960s when it hit its stride with audiences, with it not uncommon today for this work to earn nearly half the annual revenues for a given dance company. The Nutcracker has taken its place with Scrooge, Santa, Bing Crosby singing White Christmas, Rudolph, and other holiday icons that make Christmas feel Christmassy. Speaking of flops that because they were associated with Christmas eventually became huge hits, It's a Wonderful Life was just such a flop of a thing. In this case, actually flopping twice before the decades that followed saw it gain traction. The film's genesis is based on a Christmas card short story by Philip Van Doren Stern, which was originally sent out to around 200 of Stern's friends and family in December of 1943. The short story was called The Greatest Gift and was inspired by a dream Stern had one night in the 1930s. Stern, already an accomplished author at this point, albeit historical author, then proceeded to write the 4,000-word short story about a man named George who was going to commit suicide by jumping off a bridge, but was stopped when someone happened by and struck up a conversation with him. The mysterious person eventually learns that George wishes he'd never been born and grants George his wish. George soon discovers that no one that he knows recognizes him, and that many of the people he'd known were worse off in their lives because he had never existed. Most prominent among these was his little brother, who had drowned because George had not been there to save him. George eventually gets the stranger to change everything back in the way it was, and is now glad to be alive. Stern initially sought to find a publisher for his 21-page story, but failed in this endeavor. The first place it flopped and almost didn't become a thing. However, once nobody wanted to buy it, instead he chose to make a Christmas card-style gift out of it and printed 200 copies, which he sent out to friends and family in December of 1943. This ended up being a gift that gave back, as the work eventually found its way into the hands of producer David Hempstead, who worked for RKO Pictures. RKO Pictures then paid Stern $10,000, which is around $124,000 today, for the motion picture rights to the story, just 4 months after Stern had sent it out. Various adaptations were then written before the screenplay version of the story was sold to Frank Capra's production company in 1945, also for $10,000. Capra's company subsequently adapted the story further and ultimately made it into It's a Wonderful Life, which debuted in 1946. Incidentally, It's a Wonderful Life was the first film Jimmy Stewart did after serving in World War II. It came at a time when he was strongly considering quitting acting, as he didn't know if he'd be able to continue after his experiences during World War II as a pilot with the 703rd Bombardment Squadron, initially as a first officer, and shortly thereafter as a captain. Following this, during combat operations over Germany, Stewart found himself promoted to the rank of major, participating in several counted and uncounted missions on his orders into Nazi-occupied Europe, flying his B-24 in the lead position of his group in order to inspire his troops. For his bravery during these missions, he twice received the Distinguished Flying Cross and 3 times received the Air Medal, among other accolades. In any event, going back to It's a Wonderful Life, the film cost $3.7 million to make, which is about $44 million today, and only took in about $3.3 million in its initial run in theaters, thus considered a major flop after its release, and partially due to this film's poor showing at the box office, Capra's whole production company went bankrupt, and Stewart began to further doubt his ability to act following the war. However, thanks to being considered a Christmas movie, which Capra himself claimed to be a surprise to him, as he didn't see it that way, and indeed, if you really think about it, Christmas is only an extremely small part of the movie at the very end, and not really an explicit factor in anything. But in any event, the movie steadily gained momentum over the years, and today is considered one of the great classics in cinema history. Stewart himself would later state that It's a Wonderful Life became his favorite of all the movies he had made over his career. On top of that, today the film is considered by the American Film Institute as one of the 100 greatest American films ever made. They also have it as the #1 most inspirational American film of all time. So, note to self, if you're going to create something associated with Christmas, and even if people hate it at first, they might come around later. Now for some bonus facts. Interestingly, while the story of It's a Wonderful Life was based on The Greatest Gift, the character of George Bailey was actually based on the founder of Bank America, A.P. Giannini. Giannini was also the inspiration for a similar character in Capra's American Madness. At the age of 14, Giannini left school and began working with his stepfather, Lorenzo Scatena, in the produce industry as a produce broker. By the time he was 31, he was able to sell much of the interest in the company to his employees and had planned to retire. However, 1 year later, he was asked to join the Columbus Savings and Loan Society, which was a small bank in North Beach, California. Once he joined up, he found that almost nobody at the Savings and Loan nor other banks were willing to give loans to anyone but the rich or those owning businesses. At first, Giannini attempted to convince the other directors at the Savings and Loan to start lending to working-class citizens to give them home and auto loans, among other things. He felt that working-class citizens, though lacking in assets to guarantee the loan against, were generally honest and would pay back their loans when they could. Further, by loaning them money, it would allow working-class citizens to better themselves in ways they would not have been able to do without the money lent to them, such as being able to buy a home or start a new business. He was never able to convince the other directors to begin lending to the working class, so instead he raised funds to start his own bank, the Bank of Italy, which later became the Bank of America. He then made a practice of not offering loans based on how much money or equity a person had, but based primarily on how he judged their character. Within a year of this, Bank of Italy had over $700,000 in deposits from these working-class individuals, which is somewhere around $15 to $20 million today. By the middle of the 1920s, it had become the 3rd largest bank in the United States, and something we'll cover in more detail in a later video, but Giannini is also a huge part of why San Francisco is still a thing, as well as why the epicenter of the film industry today is in Hollywood. But briefly today, much like the fictitious George Bailey, Giannini kept little for himself through all of this. Despite the fact that the bank he started was worth billions of dollars at the time of his death, Giannini's entire estate was valued at only $500,000 when he died at the age of 79 in 1949. He avoided acquiring great wealth as he felt it would cause him to lose touch with the working class. For much of his career, he refused pay for his work, and when the board attempted to give him $1.5 million as a bonus one year, he gave it all away to the University of California, stating, "Money itch is a bad thing. I have never had that trouble." Moving on from there, in the scene in It's a Wonderful Life where Uncle Billy is is drunk and leaving the party at George's house, the sound of him apparently running into some garbage cans and falling down is heard. In actuality, one of the crew members accidentally dropped some equipment after Uncle Billy walked out of the shot. Rather than break character, the actor who played Uncle Billy, Thomas Mitchell, shouted, "I'm all right, I'm all right," and Jimmy Stewart also played along. The take was obviously the one that made it into the movie, despite the gaffe. The stagehand that dropped the equipment was given a $10 bonus for this. Next up, Donna Reed really did manage to hit the window in the first take of the scene where she makes a wish and throws a rock at the window of her future home. Originally, they had planned to have her throw it and had a sharpshooter standing by to shoot the window at the appropriate moment, to make it appear the rock had broken it. This turned out not to be necessary as Reed has quite the throwing arm. Speaking of being good with her hands, Donna Reed also grew up on a farm, and on a bet from Lionel Barrymore demonstrated how to milk a cow on the set of It's a Wonderful Life.